Mr. Minsun, I'm sorry. Minsun!
You're staying in my room tonight.
The kiss happened before she could even draw a breath to apologize. The scent hit her first, spilled vintage champagne, the metallic tang of fear, and the oppressive heat of 300 dangerous guests who practically owned the city's underworld. Then the sound stopped. Not all of it, just the parts that mattered. The string quartet faltered, the clinking of crystals ceased, and the low velvet hum of crime lords making deals evaporated. All of it dropped away in the space of 3 seconds as the man strode across the marble floor toward her. Naomi, knuckles white around her concierge tablet, pressing it against the bodice of her deep red dress like a shield, understood exactly, too late, that he was not slowing down. Min Sun, whose ruthless reputation was whispered in back rooms and written in blood-stained ledgers, didn't even look at his furious fiancée. He walked straight past his armed guards, placed a firm hand on the back of Naomi's neck, and crashed his lips onto hers in front of everyone. A photographer's flash erupted, illuminating Jia's stunning, open-mouthed gasp. Every other person in the penthouse held perfectly still, caught in the terrifying space between witnessing a scandalous romance and a lethal declaration of war. He pulled back just an inch. "You're staying in my room tonight," he whispered. The heavy click of the deadbolt echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous silence of the penthouse suite. Naomi stood frozen on the plush carpet, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The heat of Min Sun's demanding kiss still burned on her lips, a terrifying phantom sensation that violently clashed with the sudden freezing reality of her imprisonment. He didn't look at her immediately. Min Sun walked over to a crystal decanter on the mahogany bar, loosening his silk tie with the terrifying grace of a predator who had already won. He poured a finger of dark amber liquid, the clinking of glass cutting through the room's suffocating tension. Gone was the man who had just passionately claimed her in front of 300 elite guests. The cold, calculating syndicate boss that replaced him was infinitely more dangerous. "Why am I here?" Naomi's voice trembled, betraying the brave facade she desperately tried to project. Her fingers gripped the edges of her deep red dress, wishing she could rewind the last 10 minutes and disappear into the hotel's service corridors. Min Sun turned, leaning against the bar, his dark eyes locked onto hers, entirely devoid of the heat they had held downstairs. "You are here, Naomi, because of Leo." The breath left Naomi's lungs in a violent rush. Leo, her reckless, foolish younger brother. "What did he do?" she whispered, the air in the suite suddenly too thin to breathe. "He decided to play a game he couldn't survive," Min Sun said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that offered zero comfort. He set his glass down and crossed the room, stopping just inches away. Naomi forced herself not to step back, though every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to run. "3 days ago, your brother bypassed my security and emptied one of my private safes. He didn't take cash, he took a ledger, a very specific, heavily encrypted drive that contains the financial arteries of my entire operation and the critical vulnerabilities of Gia's family." Naomi shook her head, denial rushing to her defense. "No, Leo makes mistakes, but he's not a master thief. He wouldn't steal from the mafia." "He did." Min Sun cut her off, his tone absolute. "And right now, my men are the only reason Gia's father hasn't found him and flayed him alive to retrieve it." The reality of the shattered champagne glass and the furious heiress downstairs crashed over her. The kiss, the public spectacle. "You used me," she breathed, the puzzle pieces violently snapping together. "You kissed me to humiliate Gia, to sever the alliance." "I kissed you to create an alibi," he corrected softly, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear. The touch was agonizingly gentle, a stark contrast to the death sentence hanging between them. As long as you are my fiercely protected, long-hidden mistress, Leo keeps breathing. You will play the part perfectly, Naomi, because if you don't, I will stop protecting him. Morning sunlight sliced through the grand lobby's vaulted windows, but the warmth did nothing to thaw the ice in Naomi's veins. She stood behind the polished brass and mahogany of the concierge desk, her impeccable navy uniform a stark contrast to the deep red dress she had carefully hidden in her locker. Her jaw ached from clenching it all night on the edge of Min Sun's velvet sofa, wide awake, listening to the city below. Now, bathed in the soft ambient lighting of her everyday reality, the sheer terror of her new existence began to settle in. She wasn't just a hotel employee anymore. She was a moving target. She arranged a stack of theater brochures with meticulous care, forcing her hands to stop trembling. The lobby hummed with its usual morning rhythm, the scent of roasted espresso, the quiet murmur of international wealth, the soft chime of the gilded elevators, but the symphony of her workplace had been irrevocably altered. The threat wasn't loud. It was chillingly quiet. It started with the man reading a financial paper in the velvet armchair closest to her desk. He hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Then there was the woman near the sprawling orchid display, sipping a macchiato, while her gaze remained fixed entirely on Naomi, her designer sunglasses failing to mask the predatory calculation in her eyes. Gia's family didn't need to send armed thugs to make a point. Their spies wore bespoke suits and carried leather briefcases. They belonged in this luxurious world just as much as Min Sun did, and they were letting Naomi know that absolutely nowhere in this hotel was safe. "Excuse me, miss," Naomi snapped, snapping her head up to face a well-dressed guest asking for a gallery recommendation. She forced her trademark unshakable smile onto her face, her professional training kicking in, even as her pulse roared in her ears. "Of course, sir. The contemporary exhibit on 5th is breathtaking today." She wrote down the address, sliding the heavy cardstock across the counter. As the guest walked away, the man with the newspaper finally folded it, standing up with a deliberate, agonizing slowness. He approached the desk, leaving the paper on the marble counter right in front of her. He didn't say a single word, just offered a cold, knowing smirk before walking out the revolving glass doors. Naomi looked down. Tucked into the crease of the financial pages was a single, violently crushed hothouse lily, the exact flowers from Gia's ruined engagement party. A violent shiver racked Naomi's spine. They were watching her every move, waiting for her to slip, waiting for the illusion of Min Sun's mistress to crack so they could hunt down her brother. Taking a shaky breath, Naomi swept the crushed flower into the trash bin beneath her desk. If she was going to survive until her shift ended, she had to stop acting like frightened prey. The first rule of selling a lie is making it look like a secret you are desperate to keep. Min Sun understood this perfectly. That evening, he didn't parade Naomi through the front doors of the city's most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant. Instead, he led her through the dimly lit private rear entrance, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. Their hurried footsteps echoed against the damp pavement, perfectly mimicking the frantic energy of a couple stealing time in the shadows. It was exactly the kind of entrance a man orchestrating an illicit rendezvous would choose. Inside, their private dining alcove was draped in heavy velvet and the rich scent of roasted garlic and old wine. Naomi's silk dress felt like fragile armor as she slid into the booth. Min Sun sat dangerously close, immediately erasing the careful distance they had maintained in the car. The invisible audience was already in position. Naomi could practically feel the weight of Gia's spies watching from the main dining floor. She reached for her water glass to steady her trembling hands, but Min Sun smoothly intercepted her. He caught her wrist, his touch a sudden jolt of heat that forced her to look directly into his calculating eyes. "Smile, Naomi," he murmured. His voice was a soft, steady rhythm meant only for her, even as his thumb traced small, deliberate circles over her pulse point. "You are supposed to be looking at the man you have been hiding for 2 years." She swallowed hard, forcing her rigid muscles to relax, allowing a soft, manufactured smile to touch her lips. She leaned in closer, letting the dark, spicy warmth of his cologne envelop her. To anyone peering through the sheer curtains of their alcove, it looked like a breathless, intimate confession. Without breaking eye contact, Min-soon reached into the breast pocket of his tailored jacket and produced a weathered envelope. He didn't open it. Instead, he slid it across the pristine tablecloth, gently pressing it into her hands. Inside is a lease agreement for a private townhouse across the city. It was signed 24 months ago under a shell corporation, but your signature is on the secondary documents. It proves I have been keeping you long before my engagement was ever arranged. Naomi clutched the envelope, the fabricated history suddenly giving their dangerous game a physical weight. He wasn't just building a temporary alibi, he was entirely rewriting her past. Suddenly, Min-soon leaned in, his hand sliding to the nape of her neck. He tilted her head, perfectly blocking the sideline of the main room with his broad shoulders, and kissed her. It was slower than the night before, calculated, a masterful performance of quiet, enduring devotion designed for the spies in the shadows. But as his breath mingled with hers, the terrifying realization wasn't the audience watching them. The terrifying part was how naturally Naomi leaned into the lie. The heavy glass doors of the atelier sealed shut, cutting off the relentless noise of the avenue. Naomi stood surrounded by racks of imported silk and velvet, holding a charcoal evening gown she had no intention of wearing. Min-sun's black card felt like a lead weight in her purse, a mandatory prop for her role as a pampered mistress. She reached out to brush the delicate fabric, grateful for the momentary quiet, but the illusion of safety shattered the moment the boutique's private elevator chimed. The air temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jia stepped out, moving with the terrifying, unhurried grace of a viper. She wore a tailored ivory suit, looking every inch the untouchable heiress, though the heavy diamond engagement ring was noticeably missing from her finger. At a single sharp flick of Jia's wrist, the 2 sales attendants silently vanished into the back room. There was no audience here, no cameras, no spies, and no Min-sun to shield her. Jia closed the distance, the sharp click of her heels echoing against the marble floor. She stopped just a breath away, invading Naomi's space with a suffocating cloud of bespoke floral perfume. "You play the frightened little bird very well," Jia said, her voice a soft, venomous purr that barely carried over the quiet ambient music. She reached out, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the collar of the charcoal gown in Naomi's hands. "But you and I both know you don't belong in this cage. A concierge playing dress-up. Tell me, how much is he paying you to ruin my wedding?" Naomi's pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The primal urge to lower her eyes, to apologize and shrink away, screamed in her mind. It was the survival instinct of someone who had spent her whole life serving the wealthy and powerful. But the terrifying memory of Min-sun's warning flared hot in her chest. If she didn't play this part flawlessly, her brother would die. Naomi forced her chin up. She met Jia's icy, furious glare and flatly refused to look away. "He isn't paying me anything," Naomi replied. Her voice was shockingly steady, dropping an octave to match the quiet lethality of the room. "And I'm not playing dress-up. I've been waiting in the shadows for 2 years, Jia. You were just a business transaction he finally decided to cancel." Jia's hand froze on the silk fabric. The sheer audacity of the insult landed like a physical blow. a flicker of genuine shock momentarily breaking her perfectly curated mask. She expected a weeping, terrified pawn, but Naomi was completely rewriting the script. Naomi gently but firmly pulled the gown out of Gia's grasp. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Naomi said, turning her back on the most dangerous woman in the city, "I have a date to get ready for." The 14th floor security server room was perfectly isolated. There were no basement shadows here, just a sterile, windowless room humming with the quiet power of the hotel's sprawling surveillance network. Naomi locked the heavy door behind her, leaning against the cool metal for a fraction of a second as her pulse hammered in her ears. Min Sun's instructions had been absolute: play the part, smile for the spies, and leave Leo's survival entirely in his hands. But blindly trusting the syndicate boss who had hijacked her life was a leap of faith Naomi wasn't ready to take. She needed proof her brother was still alive. Moving quickly to the glowing terminal, she bypassed the standard security desk login and entered her master concierge credentials. The screen flickered, granting her unhindered access to the massive grid of archived footage. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, trembling slightly as she pulled up the timestamps from 3 days ago, the exact night Min Sun claimed Leo had emptied his private safe. She didn't know what she expected to see, but the reality struck her like a physical blow. In the grainy black and white feed of the loading dock, there was Leo. He looked terrified, moving erratically as he clutched a heavy, metallic drive to his chest. He kept glancing over his shoulder, slipping into the alleyway just seconds before 2 of Min Sun's armed enforcers stepped into the frame. A cold dread pooled in her stomach. Min Sun had told her his men were protecting Leo from Gia's family, but the footage painted a completely different, chilling picture. They weren't protecting him at all. They were hunting him. Before she could fully process the betrayal, the terminal screen flashed a harsh, glaring red, an override alert. By using her own credentials to search heavily restricted dates, she had tripped a silent, secondary alarm in the system. The hotel's digital security wasn't just monitored by the daytime staff. It was directly routed to Min Sun's private network. She had broken his most strict rule, and now his system knew exactly where she was and what she had uncovered. The soft, terrifying click of the heavy door unlocking behind her shattered the steady hum of the servers. She didn't need to turn around to know who was standing in the threshold. The soft, terrifying click of the heavy door locking behind her shattered the steady hum of the servers. Naomi didn't need to turn around. The sudden shift in the room's air pressure, the faint scent of dark amber and rain, was all the warning she received before Min Sun stepped fully into the glow of the monitors. He didn't shout, he didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he walked toward the terminal with a terrifying, absolute calm. A spare swivel chair sat beside her workstation. Without breaking his lethal gaze from the screen, he grabbed the back of the other chair, leaving hers entirely untouched, and shoved it violently across the room. It slammed into the steel server racks with a deafening crack. Naomi flinched, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the console. She pointed to the frozen footage of his enforcers chasing her terrified brother, her voice breaking as she demanded to know why he had lied. Why were his men hunting Leo like an animal if he claimed to be protecting him? Min Sun leaned over her, his arms caging her against the desk. He told her she was only seeing half the frame. With a sharp exhale, he reached out and tapped a swift command onto her keyboard, shifting the camera angle to the alleyway's alternate feed. There, lurking in the shadows just ahead of Leo's path, were 3 of Gia's top assassins. Min Sun's voice dropped to a ragged, furious whisper. He explained that his men hadn't been hunting her brother. They had been aggressively intercepting him before he walked blindly into a slaughter. The exhaustion in Min Sun's eyes finally bled through his ruthless facade. He confessed that keeping Leo hidden was tearing his own syndicate apart from the inside, and if she continued to trigger internal alarms by playing amateur detective, she wouldn't just sign Leo's death warrant, she'd sign his, too. For the first time since the champagne glass shattered at the engagement party, Naomi saw the man beneath the untouchable mafia myth. He wasn't just a puppet master pulling her strings. He was standing on the exact same fragile ledge she was. A heavy, transformative silence stretched between them, replacing the cold air of betrayal with a dangerous, unspoken truce. The heavy silence in the master dressing room was a stark contrast to the impending war awaiting them at the Choi Estate Gala. Naomi stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, her reflection a stranger wrapped in shimmering, liquid gold silk. It was a gown designed to draw every eye in the room, a weapon forged by Min Sun to blind his enemies. But her hands still trembled as she struggled with the intricate clasp of a diamond necklace. Min Sun stepped up behind her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. He wore a midnight black tuxedo that only amplified the dangerous stillness he carried. Without a word, he brushed her hands aside. The brief graze of his fingers against her bare skin sent a sudden, traitorous shiver down her spine. As he secured the clasp, the cold weight of the diamonds settled against her collarbone, but his gaze in the mirror was intensely warm, anchoring her racing pulse. He didn't step back. Instead, his voice dropped to a quiet murmur, filling the intimate space between them. He told her she needed to know exactly who she was walking into a room with tonight. He confessed that the Choi family didn't just force this engagement for power. They had engineered the hostile takeover that decimated his father's empire 10 years ago. Naomi watched his dark eyes harden in the mirror. He revealed that he hadn't spent the last decade building a syndicate out of a desire for control. He had built it to systematically dismantle the people who had ordered his family's execution. The ledger her brother stole wasn't just a list of financial vulnerabilities. It contained the buried kill orders from a decade ago. It was the only tangible proof of the Choi's treason against the ruling underworld council. He turned her gently by her shoulders, forcing her to face him completely. The ruthless mafia myth was gone, leaving behind a man who had carried a ghost story for far too long. He warned her that tonight, Jia's father would try to isolate her, to break her with threats, or buy her with impossible sums of money. But she held the ultimate leverage now. She wasn't just his alibi anymore. She was the final piece on the board, holding the key to his revenge. A newfound fire ignited in Naomi's chest, burning away the last remnants of the terrified concierge. She finally understood the true weight of the stolen ledger, and more dangerously, she understood the man who was risking everything to protect her brother. She reached up, deliberately smoothing his silk lapel, and silently promised herself that they would burn the Choi Empire to the ground together. The Choi Estate Gala was a masterclass in suffocating opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a brittle, glittering light over the city's most dangerous elite, masking the lethal tension humming beneath the classical music. Naomi moved through the sea of bespoke suits and designer gowns, her liquid gold silk dress functioning as both armor and a beacon. She kept Min Sun in her periphery, but the sheer density of the crowd inevitably pulled them apart. It was exactly the opening Jia had been waiting for. Before Naomi could signal Min Sun, two broad-shouldered guards flanked her, smoothly forcing her down a quiet, marble-floored hallway away from the ballroom's prying eyes. They pushed her into a sprawling private study, the heavy oak doors sealing shut behind her. Standing by the grand fireplace, radiating cold malice, was Jia. But she wasn't alone. Kneeling on the Persian rug, his face bruised and his breathing ragged, was Leo. Naomi's heart slammed against her ribs in a violent rhythm. The terrified concierge inside her wanted to scream, to fall to her knees and beg for her brother's life. But the woman Min Sun had armed with the truth refused to break. Gia smiled, a triumphant, venomous curve of her lips. She declared the charade was finally over, demanding the stolen ledger in exchange for what was left of Naomi's brother. She reveled in her perceived victory, assuming Naomi was nothing more than a fragile pawn entirely out of her depth. But Gia had made a fatal miscalculation. She didn't realize Naomi already held the entire board. Naomi didn't tremble, she didn't plead. She reached into the discreet hidden pocket of her gown and produced her phone. With a devastating, icy calm, she explained that she hadn't been foolish enough to bring the physical ledger into enemy territory. Instead, she had spent the afternoon uploading its heavily encrypted contents to a dead man's switch. The decryption keys were already sitting in the secure inboxes of the ruling Underworld Council, programmed to unlock automatically at midnight if she didn't personally enter the cancellation code. Gia's triumphant smile vanished entirely, replaced by stark, creeping terror, as Naomi recited the exact dates of the kill orders from 10 years ago, the irrefutable proof of the Choi's ultimate treason against the Council. Naomi closed the distance between them, her voice echoing with the lethal confidence of a syndicate queen. She informed Gia that if her brother wasn't walking safely out the front door of the estate in exactly 60 seconds, the entire Choi empire would be burned to ashes by morning. At that exact moment, the heavy doors swung open. Min Sun stepped into the study, his dark eyes instantly taking in the shifted power dynamic. He didn't have to draw a weapon or utter a single threat. He simply took his place beside Naomi, a silent, absolute testament to the devastating trap they had sprung together. Dawn broke over the city in streaks of bruised purple and gold, bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. The suffocating tension of the Choi estate was miles away, replaced by the quiet, heavy stillness of absolute victory. The severed engagement was already sending shockwaves through the underworld. Gia's family had capitulated in the dead of night, utterly paralyzed by the threat of the dead man's switch. Leah was safe, secured on a private flight out of the city before the sun even crested the skyline. Naomi stood by the glass, the liquid gold silk of her gown now feeling less like armor and more like a relic of a war she had already won. She stared down at the waking city, the reality of the last 4 days finally catching up to her. The door to the study opened softly, and Min Sun stepped into the morning light. The midnight black tuxedo was gone, replaced by a simple dark shirt with rolled-up sleeves. The lethal, untouchable Mafia Boss had vanished, leaving only the man who had laid his entire empire on the line for her. He stopped a few feet away, the space between them suddenly crackling with an unspoken question. He didn't offer a triumphant smile. Instead, he reached into his pocket and placed a sleek black passport and a new identity on the glass table. His voice was a low, steady rumble that commanded the quiet room. He told her the debt was settled. Leo was free. The Chois were neutralized, and she had played her part flawlessly. He offered her a clean break, a flight to anywhere in the world, and enough money to ensure she never had to bow to the wealthy or powerful ever again. He was giving her a choice to walk away, to step back into the light and leave the shadows behind forever. Naomi looked at the passport, then up into the dark, profound depths of his eyes. She saw the quiet resignation there, the assumption that she would run from the darkness he inhabited. But the terrified hotel concierge had died somewhere between the stolen ledger and the shattered champagne glass. She didn't reach for the passport. Instead, Naomi closed the distance between them, letting the morning light catch the defiance in her eyes. She reached up, her fingers threading into the dark hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him down until their lips were just a breath apart. She whispered that she was done hiding in the shadows, and she was done playing a part. She wasn't leaving. Min Sun's breath hitched. The ruthless syndicate boss finally surrendering as he pulled her flush against his chest, sealing her choice with a kiss that promised they would rule his world together. And just like that, Naomi stepped out of the safety of her old life and claimed her place in Min Sun's dangerous world. If her ultimate choice to stay in the shadows had your heart racing, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another thrilling story. I love seeing how far these narratives travel across the globe. So drop down into the comments right now and let me know, what city or country are you watching from today? Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.